Good evening. Well, it's night, isn't it? It's actually 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So good night and welcome to Balance Views. I am Mr. Balance, at least I will be tonight. Um, and we're here talking about a lot of different subjects. Inclusive of tonight is very tailored, though. As many of you may know, but first before I start, I want to say this, which is thanks to those of you who have subscribed to the channel so far. I'm really trying to grow this platform. I expect it to be a very, very socially diverse platform covering a variety of subject matters from politics, which I've been doing for the first week or so of the program, to social justice, to the economy, to housing, what's happening in our environment, and both domestic and international. So, not just tailored for domestic news and domestic consumption, but more global in its reach and its approach. So, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being here, and hope you make this a regular routine. I have not nailed down yet specific timeline in when I will be on for this program. As some of you may know, I have another channel called Cranky Live. It's a sports channel, which I do mainly during the week between 6 and 8, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, sometimes Thursdays. But it can get pretty hectic and pretty busy trying to do multiple programs. So, but I will make an effort to ensure I do quite a bit of this, keep it alive and keep going. So thanks for those of you who have joined me. So tonight we'll talk about the National Association for Black Journalists Conference. And why this is important is our former president, Donald Trump, was at the conference as a guest to speak to the journalists there. And prior to the conference, there were a lot of consternation about whether or not he should have been invited or should he be there. And not everyone was happy about the decision to invite him to the conference. Some of the more prominent journalists, like Roland Martin, for example, not sure they digested him being there or he should be there. Because as many of you know, he's a very divisive person. And I've said a lot historically about Blacks, and a lot of which have not been received well, a lot of which have been deemed racist in its context and what's communicated. And so at that conference, he said a lot of different things. So there was a 3-person panel, and ironically, it was all 3 women on the panel. We know his history with women, but we had from ABC News, Rachel Scott, from Fox News, Harris Faulkner, and from Semafor, I should say, it's a news organization, Kadia, Goba, and they were the moderators. All 3 of them took turn asking questions. And during the session, Trump engaged in Q&A questions with the journalists, discussing various issues impacting the Black community, as you can imagine. But it was very contentious moments in the discussion, and we'll play the entirety of it tonight, and we'll go through it. The event drew mixed reaction from the audience. I don't think as a people we are monolithic as Black people, but I think we cater more to engage with people who want to engage with us, like the Democratic Party. I know there've been some kind of reach across the aisle by Trump and his team to try to garner much of the Black vote, or more of the Black vote. I shouldn't say much. That number fluctuates over time. I think it was really going in the 20 percentile is what my understanding was when Biden was deemed to be the nominee, and that number has changed and is being reversed subsequent to him endorsing Kamala, actually. But during the discussion, he challenged, he made comments around immigrants and the nature of immigrants coming to the country. He made comments about Kamala's racial identity. And before the conference, actually, there were protests outside the organization and within. And my understanding that there was a lot of contention, a lot of hand-wringing within the National Association of Black Journalists as to should he be invited to speak there. And I think one of the co-chairs actually did resign from the group because of the fact that he's been invited. So we'll go through and play some of the excerpts from the discussion, and then we'll discuss them. And you can, I'm going to play it on my phone, actually. So it's hard for someone to call in, but we'll try to figure it out. But here's the start of the conference, and I'll stop during the discussion to pinpoint certain things.
Test.
Let me know if you can hear this, everyone.
Good afternoon, NABJ, and welcome to a conversation with...
I'm going to stop it. Tell me if you can hear it, because sometimes I play these things and people tell me they're not hearing it. And I spend time trying to figure out to make sure it works. So whoever's in the chat, can you just indicate if you can hear this? No, there are a few people in the chat. Please indicate if you can hear the what's being said.
Former President Donald Trump. This discussion continues a decades-long tradition during election years of inviting journalists to discuss the policies and their impact with the candidates who are running for president and the impact of those policies, especially in Black communities. Former Presidents George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton have attended the NABJ conventions either as presidents or as presidential candidates in past years. NABJ is currently in conversation with Vice President Kamala Harris's team to schedule a Q&A either in person or virtually in September. As journalists, we use opportunities like these both to inform our reporting, but also to help voters understand the choices that they face in a consequential and historic election year. NABJ has partnered with PolitiFact to fact-check this conversation in real time. You can access that feed on social media using the hashtag NABJFactCheck. Again, the hashtag is NABJFactCheck. We have a lot to get to, and we do not want to waste any time. So let's bring out the former president of the United States, the Republican nominee for president, former President Donald Trump. Thank you. How are you?
So I'll say this. The person speaking that did the introduction was Rachel Scott. Now, when she goes through her question and he responds, but I will provide some comments because it's important for me to be balanced in this, actually. So even though you hear me talk about Trump, I'm not balanced when it comes to him. I do think the first question was an interesting one.
Mr. President, we so appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe Black district attorneys. You've attacked Black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking Black supporters to vote for you, why should Black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question so in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the Black population of this country. I've done so much for the Black population of this country, including employment, including opportunity zones with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, which is one of the greatest programs ever for Black workers and Black entrepreneurs. I've done so much. And, you know, and I say this, historically black colleges and universities were out of money. They were stone cold broke. And I saved them and I gave them long-term financing, and nobody else was doing it. I think it's a very rude introduction. I don't know exactly why you would do something like that. And let me go a step further. I was invited here and I was told my opponent, whether it was Biden or Kamala, I was told my opponent was going to be here. It turned out my opponent isn't here. You invited me under false pretense. And then you said, you can't do it with Zoom. Well, where's Zoom? She's going to do it with Zoom, and she's not coming. And then you were half an hour late, just so we understand. I have too much respect for you to be late. They couldn't get their equipment working or something was
Mr. President,
wrong.
I would love
I think
if you
it's
can
a
answer
very
the question
nasty
on your rhetoric
question.
and why you
I
believe
have
that
answered
black
the
voters
question.
should trust you with another
I
4
have
years.
been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act.
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace.
Let me just ask a follow-up, sir, and then we'll move on.
So let me say this, actually, a couple of things. One is, it was true. The equipment was messing up for a while. I'm not sure about the timeline for being late, but I don't think it was the right question to ask to open a discussion. So, I'm not, and I don't hide it, I'm not a Trump fan, but if you're going to ask someone a question, right, it's a first question of the evening. It cannot be the most contentious question. What you do is you got to reel the person in. You got to bring them in, right? You got to bring them in. You got to make them feel comfortable. You don't put them on the defensive right away. And the fact that she put him on the defensive means the conversation could only go one way, right? You have to think about it that way. If you put me under the microscope from minute one, my guards are up. And look, even when his guards are up, he's going to say things that put his foot in his mouth. That's what he does really well. But I would agree, the question wasn't the right question. It set the tone, exactly, Brando. It set the tone for the rest of the interview. It's not the right. It's throw him a softball question. She did greet him, so that's not the case. And I think sometimes as journalists, when you're the moderator, you feel the pressure because you know what the Monday morning quarterback's going to say. You were soft on him. I get that as an interviewer, so I understand how that works. You're soft on him. You didn't ask the right questions. But she went right at the back at him with the most difficult question. That question is in the middle question. You work up to that question. That question is the drop the mic question. So you have to work up to drop the mic question. You can't ask it at the first question. Where's the conversation going to go? So, and he does, and he doesn't receive this well, and he's not going to back down because that's not who he is. And he never answers question anyway. 95% of the time he doesn't answer the question. Now, saying I'm the best president since Abraham Lincoln, I mean, there's been a lot of presidents, by the way, people. And yes, he did do some work with HSBC, but they weren't broke. They weren't going out of business. That's nonsense, right? Economically, yeah, the economy was doing fine before 2020 when he was in power. Since 2020 and now, inflation, I think prices have gone up just over 20%. And he was a contributor to that. And he handled the economy poorly during COVID when we went into lockdown. So he was to blame for part of this. Biden inherited it. And that's what normally happens when you inherit a poor situation. It's hard to get out of it, especially when it's an economy. So, but I don't think she did a good job of asking the toughest question as the first question and putting him right on the defensive.
Including Republicans on Capitol Hill have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
Give me
a definition then. Would you give me a definition of that? Give me a definition.
Sir, I'm asking you a question, a very direct question.
Define it for me, if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a Black woman?
Well, I can say no. I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black. until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always
But you know
identified
what?
as a black woman.
I
She went to a
respect
historically
either
black
one.
college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that
I think
she is
somebody should look into that too when you ask continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
It's a direct question, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is a DEI hire, as some
I
Republicans
really
have
don't
said?
know. I mean, I really don't know. Could be. There are some, and there are plenty. I know this lady right over there, Harris, is a fantastic person who just interviewed me at length. And we had a great interview, I think, and I heard you got very good ratings on that.
Well,
interview.
you told me it was the longest one of your life, so we had a good discussion. Look, I want to talk about why you're here today. I mean,
So the question around is she a DEI? Look, as soon as she announced and she got the bounce, Republicans started mentioning the word DEI. That's a DEI person, right? And I think Biden, when he made her his vice president, he had basically said he's going to have a woman. I'm not sure it was a black woman when he was running for the nomination for Democrats previously. So the Republicans, as they like to do, they like to make sure they capture their base, and their base is both of them. And DEI is deemed to be a bad word nowadays, just like affirmative action was before it. And so he wanted, I mean, he knows what DEI is, but he doesn't want to say it because it's difficult to pin him down because he doesn't really answer a question. And it's hard to get him to answer when someone doesn't want to answer, right? And his base doesn't hold him accountable, so he can do that. So he hasn't really answered the question. But what he said was take a lot of people up front, which I find interesting. Was he said she was not black, that she's always cast herself as Indian. I don't know what she has cast herself on. I'll be honest, to be frank. I haven't focused on that. I don't think I've ever said she's Indian, but she's estranged from her dad, I think, at one point, and she connects with her mom much more. Her dad is Jamaican, and her mom is Indian, so she's mixed. And I have always said this, actually, which is, as Black people, we think we have a monopoly on those who are mixed raced. And maybe because we have been told historically that if somebody has Black in them, they're just Black because it taints other races. I don't know what it is. Is it an inferiority complex or a superiority complex? I have no idea what it is. But it's really interesting that we want to. So shouldn't South Asians claim her as their own also? Her mom is South Asian. People normally connect with their mom in a lot of instances. So I don't think there should be a fight about who she is and what her race is. I think both races need to embrace her. And should she really deny a given race? Her mom is Indian, her dad is Black, and we're saying she's ours, we own her, you can't have her. I don't think that's the approach to take. People should just embrace her as a human being, that she's Black and Indian. And I'm sure on her dad's side, she probably has way down the line some Caucasian in her. Her dad was pretty light, actually. And if you look at the history of slavery and colonization, you know there's something in our past at some point, given our different shades that we have, that people come from a long history of people who may have had their ancestors being mixed at some point. So this view that she has to be Black, I don't buy that view. At the same time, I've never heard her say anything other than she's Black. And I know that everyone was in uproar about this. The news media lost their mind about it. But I'm not sure they realize that. So how should the South Asians feel? How should Indians feel about this when Blacks are saying she's theirs and you can't have her? I think we should all have her. And if we get everybody to vote for her, then we don't have to have Trump as president. But it's interesting. But what he says is meant to be a very negative, because he's trying to get the Black vote. So if she's not Black, why you focus on her? Why do you want to embrace her? That's what he's trying to allude to. And a lot of Republicans in the House, especially, they had a meeting in the House with Johnson and his team to talk about this. He basically says they got to be very careful. That's Johnson, who heads up the House for the Republicans, the GOP. They got to be careful about what they say in public domain about her as it relates to race. But the good old boys down south don't really care. They got to say what they mean. I mean what they say.
I mean, it is not lost on us how divided we are as a country.
And by the way, this is Harris Faulkner from Fox News going to ask a question. she's a supporter of his. She works at Fox News. She's going to throw in her softball question. In hindsight, they maybe should have had her throw the softball question first than the more drop the mic question.
And as you were coming today, we really got to see that we were divided along the lines of race, along the lines of gender. And there is this question of, in this moment where we are, why come here? What is your message today?
My message is to stop people from invading our country that are taking, frankly, a lot of problems with it. But one of the big problems, and a lot of the journalists in this room I know and I have great respect for, a lot of the journalists in this room are black. I will tell you that coming from the border are millions and millions of people that happen to be taking black jobs. You had the best.
What exactly is a black job, sir?
A black job is anybody that has a job. That's what it is. Anybody that has a job.
All right.
And
Mr. President,
they're taking the employment away from black people. They're coming in, they're invading. It's an invasion of millions of people, probably 15, 16, 17 million people. I have a feeling it's much more than that. And everybody's been seeing what's happened. The first group of people, the black population, is affected most by that. And Kamala is allowing it to happen. She's the border czar. She's the worst border czar in the history of the world. There's never been a border czar like this. She's never even essentially been. She said she was there once, but not the right part of the border. So she was a border czar. She's done a horrible job. These people are coming into our country, and they're taking black jobs and Hispanic jobs. And frankly, they're taking union jobs. Unions are being very badly affected by all of the millions of people that are pouring into our country. And one thing, as we discussed, many of these people are coming in from mental institutions, from prisons, from jails. They're gang members in other countries. Other countries are setting loose their prisoners. They're opening up their prisons and their mental institutions, and they're taking their bad people, drug dealers, gang members, and they're bringing them into the United States. And by the way, their crime rate is going down, and our crime rate is going to be a disaster.
Mr. President, I want to get into how you.
So you notice how he answered the question. What did you interpret from that answer? I think it's a really interesting answer, actually. What did you interpret from that answer? Yes, Brian. It's not only that. What he's basically saying is that because if you're going to immigrate here illegally, you're going to get the lowest of the low jobs, aren't you? This is not like you're flying into the country and vacation and decide to stay, or you come here as a professional. What he's basically saying is that if you come here illegally, you're going to take black and Hispanic job because they're the ones who have the menial jobs. That's what he's saying. He's trying to tell you that. Now, he's at a professional organization with a lot of people who are professionals who those jobs won't be taken. So when he said the black job, they're taking jobs across all groups. He's then basically saying whites and Indians and Asians in general don't do any jobs which are deemed to be not professional in a sense. That's what he's saying. And they're taking jobs across all, I'm going to say people who come here pursue opportunities across all disciplines, across all levels. And if you come here legal, you may have to start at a more challenging place, but eventually you may work your way up. He's referencing low-skilled jobs, but then he's just saying, and look, he may be pointing at something which we all maybe rub us the wrong way, but we know a lot of the jobs, the low-level jobs, low-skilled jobs, I should say, are occupied by individuals who look like us or Hispanic. There's a hierarchy in this country, but a lot of Caucasians actually do a lot of these jobs. I mean, man must not have been to a lot of different states. Now, it may not have apparent in certain states like New York, because it always look like everybody who's Caucasian in New York look like they have great jobs, but you go to West Virginia, you go to a lot of different places in the country, it's a different setup. You go to some places in Brooklyn, actually, you'd be surprised what the school system look like. It's not all the same. So at the end of the day, I think he didn't answer that question well, but does he really care? I don't think so. That's how he is.
Address some of the issues with black communities. And I say that plural because we live in communities of color that are different. We're not all the same. We don't vote the same. We don't think the same.
Sure.
It's not monolithic. So as you come here today, I want to talk about something that bursts. And this is the weight of the inflation on this country right now. The nonprofit Money Management International recently released data from its mid-year analysis that we have found a 52% rise in people who are seeking counseling for being in credit debt. They're paying for food that is sky high on their credit cards, and now they can't pay that off. The credit counseling nonprofit MMI, as I said, is saying now that they've seen surges that they haven't seen since we were in a pandemic of people in financial trouble. Much of that falls on the shoulders of single moms, single Black moms, when you look statistically. Yeah. How do you turn it around? What's your plan for the Black community when it comes to money?
So, first of all, it's very hard to hear you for whatever reason because of the fact that they have bad equipment, because I guess, you know, this woman was unable to get the right equipment. But it's very hard for me to hear you, but I can hear every other word. It's very difficult, actually. But so I don't know if they can fix it or do something with it, but I'll do the best I can with it. The inflation is absolutely destroying our middle class, our working class, virtually every class. Inflation is a disaster in our country. Inflation is a country buster. It breaks every country. And we had, in my opinion, the worst inflation we've had. They say it's 58 years, but I think it's much more than that. It's been devastating. And if you just take a look at a lot of things they don't include, like interest rates. Interest rates went from 2.4% to 10%, and you can't get the money. People can't buy houses. They no longer have the American dream. Young people, young Black people, they don't have the American dream anymore. They can't buy a house. They can't borrow the money because of the cost of the money. They can't buy it because of the cost of housing, because of the cost to build it, because of inflation. Inflation is a disaster, and it's destroying our country. And it's destroying the Black community probably as much or more.
So what do you do?
Than any.
What's your plan?
You know what we have to do? We have to bring down the cost of energy, and that's going to bring down the cost of inflation. This was all started with a bad energy policy by Joe Biden. By the way, just if I might, I was running against a man named Biden. You probably saw that. And he was losing very badly in the polls. And then he had a rather bad debate. I would say it was a bad debate. I would say it was one of the worst debates in history, and his poll numbers crashed. And instead of saying, you know, let's keep going and maybe something happens the other way, they said, oh, we're going to replace him. Let's just replace him. That's like you're in a fight, a prize fighter's in a fight. He's not doing what you say, let's bring in another fighter. So our whole campaign was steered toward him, and now we have to steer toward him. But ultimately it's the same because they have bad policy. They have policies of open borders, unbelievable open borders, horrible energy policies. They want to get rid of, as you say, gasoline in cars. They want to get rid of oil. They want to get rid of efficient heating.
Mr. President.
Environmentally, what they're doing is killing our country. They're absolutely destroying our country. But the inflation is the thing that's hurting the Black worker, the Black population, and every other population within our country. Inflation is the worst it's been, I think, in over 100 years. And they'll fact check it. They'll say it's only 58. Whatever it may be, they don't add all the numbers. They don't add the really bad numbers, and you can check that too. But inflation, Harris, is absolutely destroying this country and the people in our country. Yes,
Mr. President, can I ask you another question that is also impacting Black Americans?
And that's very.
So let me answer the inflation question, because I think it's important, actually. He's not right about the timeline. He just said 58 years, and it's over 100 years. Those of you who are familiar with the 70s, when we had the oil crisis, inflation year over year was about 8% continuously. Now, since 2020, I think prices on the average have gone up about 20-something%. So yes, when you have COVID and you have an imbalance between supply and demand, you're going to have these issues. It was significant, right? Supply dried up, demand was significant. We had significant increase in prices. The issue is not necessarily inflation in its purest form, because right now, if you look at inflation since July or June of this year from the last year, it's about 3%. It's manageable. That's why the Fed is thinking about raising rates. So let's think about all of this. So he talks about, because he's commingling a lot of things, he talks about interest rates going from 2% to 10% and how terrible that is. He didn't link the interest rate with the inflation. The significant rise in interest rates over a short period of time was to reduce inflation. It was to reduce the ability for you to borrow freely, right? And allow inflation to moderate, then rates will be reduced in somewhat. And rates today are not the worst ever. If you live through the 80s and early 90s, 7% interest mortgage, 8% was the norm in the 80s, frankly. So if you went from the Jimmy Carter era or the Ford era, the Jimmy Carter to our actor, Ronald Reagan, you could see that progression in rates over that period of time and was much worse than now, but people were doing well. The 20-something increase in prices between February 2020 and now, that's the price increase. You lock that in, it's a big deal, and that's what people can't get over. But inflation since last year, which is being managed really well by the Fed, is now about 3%, which is better than we have in Europe, for example. So this notion that it's and he's just gonna create more energy. Inflation and consumer price index is not just based on energy. Energy is significant, yes, but services is important. Consumer products are important. It's not just energy alone. It's not just an energy issue. And that makes it interesting when he talks about these things and just pile them all together and run away with them. And everybody said, yes, yes, yes. Not breaking them down that they're contributors, they're related, they're not mutually exclusive, right? The Fed raised interest rate for a reason, to reduce the money supply, to ensure that you can't just borrow freely, and to make sure it drives down prices. But it has been stabilized. What he also haven't talked about is that unemployment is at one of its lowest rate. So even though you have inflation, rising price of goods and services, people have jobs. Now, does the increase in your pay marries to the increase in inflation since 2020? I don't think a lot of people have gotten 20% pay raise over that period of time. But I think it's not fair to say the way he's putting it without context to it. But we'll keep going.
Very clear now. Good.
I'm sorry?
It's very clear. I hear you.
Okay. So Sonia Massey, someone from Illinois, an unarmed Black woman, was shot the other day in her home by a deputy sheriff. The deputy has since been charged with murder. You've said police would get immunity from prosecution if you win. Why should someone like that officer have immunity, in your opinion?
Immunity?
Immunity.
I don't know the exact case, but I saw something, and it didn't look good to me. It didn't look good to me. Are you talking with the water, right?
Yeah. Well, police unions are not backing this person either.
Okay.
But again, why would
they're going to be charging the officer? I guess they're charging the officer.
So why should he receive immunity?
Well, he might not. I mean, it depends. It depends on what happens. I'm talking about people that are much different cases than that. We need people to protect ourselves. And by the way, in Chicago, as an example, a few weeks ago, July 4th weekend, they had 117 shootings and 17 deaths. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. We need to have our police officers have the respect and dignity back. In this particular case, I saw something that didn't look good to me. I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all.
So can you get a little more specific back to the immunity question? Who would make those
Well, right now, for the most part, people are protected by their unions, by their police unions, or by their police departments. But I'm saying if I felt, or if a group of people would feel that somebody was being unfairly prosecuted because the person did a good job maybe with crime, or made a mistake, an innocent mistake. There's a big difference between being a bad person and making an innocent mistake. But if somebody made an innocent mistake, I would want to help that person.
What would those exceptions be? What would determine
you
an
go
innocent
after
mistake?
Somebody and it's a very close call and it's very dangerous. And they have the policeman's life and woman is a very difficult thing, because sometimes you have less than a second to make a life and death decision, and sometimes very bad decisions are made. They're not made from an evil standpoint, but they're made from the standpoint of they made a mistake.
So I want to follow up really quickly. I find it interesting because you do talk about reining in prosecutors, especially when it comes to prosecutors that are prosecuting you. Why doesn't that skepticism apply to law enforcement?
Well, I've been prosecuted because I'm a political opponent of two people that have weaponized our justice system. I've been prosecuted. I just won the big case in Florida. Everyone said that was the biggest case. That was the most difficult case. And I just won it. Now, Biden has a similar case, except much worse. I was protected under the Presidential Records Act. Biden wasn't, because he wasn't president at the time. And he had 50 years worth of documents. And they ruled that he was incompetent, and therefore he shouldn't stand trial. And I said, isn't that something? He's incompetent and he can't stand trial, and yet he can be president. Isn't that nice?
Mr. President,
but they released him on the basis that he was incompetent. They said he had no memory, and he was a nice old guy, but he had no memory, and therefore we're not going to prosecute him. I won the case, and it got very little publicity. I didn't notice ABC doing any publicity on it, George.
We covered you extensively, sir. I'd love to move over on to
I
different
didn't notice
topics.
you do.
So a couple of things about what you just talked about. One was about the question about him giving immunity. He said when he's president, he's almost like going to give carte blanche immunity to the cops who may have been prosecuted, right? And the question she's asking is, I'm going to infer what she's trying to say, which is, how are you going to give carte blanche to cop when we have an example with Sonia Massey, the lady in Illinois, who he mentioned the warder who was killed by a cop. She called them, said she had an intruder. They came there. She had something on the stove. I guess she had the water in her hand. The cop threatened to shoot her and then shot her in the head. I think someone mentioned he had 4 jobs in 4 years. And so the question is, why was he a cop in the first place? That was just somebody you can say that person is inhumane and should not be anything, much as a police officer, right? So her question was more around, why are you saying you're going to give immunity to the people? Shouldn't it be based on facts and circumstances, right? And should it be given if they went through the courts and they got prosecuted for committing the crime, why would the president want to pardon them? He's saying, well, the nature of the job, it's so dangerous, which is people make mistakes, and therefore he didn't qualify it initially up front, but he's sort of inferring that, well, if it's a mistake they made, then I'll pardon them, right? Because she sort of pushed him on this, which is, why would you give him carte blanche absolution to anyone and pardon them in instances where we have seen examples time and time and time and time again where blacks are killed by police officers, especially white police officers. And it's only in periods like now, even in the last 10, 15 years or so, where cameras are pervasive, where we're getting intelligence on this. Historically, we just have to set the policeman's perspective on things, right? We didn't push back. And even if we suspected something wasn't right, because we know the person and we know who they were, they get killed in some far place, some, confrontation with cop, and we accept it. The fact that they don't have to wear body cameras, and his body camera was off, by the way, his partner wasn't, and that's why they could realize what transpired. He got fired and he's going to be charged for murder. So, that's how Trump is actually, he's pandering to his base, right? He's pandering to his base. Nothing more than that. He's a base person. It's all about his base. He doesn't care about anything else. And also, him talking about, well, look, the situation with Biden, he has a point in that situation in terms of they both took records they shouldn't have taken home. But there's 2 distinctions there. Yes, they say Biden, which is of cognitive decline, and therefore, in that instance, he wasn't being pursued like him. But here's the difference. Trump was asked time and time and time again for the information. He refused to return it. That's the difference. And he actually moved it when the Fed tried to come and get it, and his own cameras gave him up. And secondly, Judge Kennan in Florida, he didn't win any case. She took what the Supreme Court said the judge that a president is immune from prosecution and decided not to pursue it. And she was stalling every way, shape, and form before that ruling came down. And she had probably had discussion with Uncle Tom Thomas from the Supreme Court. She probably had discussion with him about this to get some view. So he came down with a ruling, and he benefited from that ruling. So she made a carte blanche decision. If it's a federal case, Trump cannot be prosecuted while he was in office, because everyone think that all his charges go away. No, the charges that incurred before he became president or before he was president, those still matter. So the conviction he received in New York for both sexual assault in civil court and for cooking the books as part of his enterprise, given his porn case, those still stand, and they have nothing to do with him being president. Let me take a couple more comments before I move on. Is this prey-leaning core cranky? What's your opinion? Is this a prey-leaning? You already can't follow, you say some things I'm struggling with. The cop cranky has not been tried by a judge and jury. Cranky, they are coercing the man to judge the case for public opinion. So Yardi is a Caucasian that has a black picture up. There can be no other rationale for it. So let me say this, Yardi, because I've been watching your dialogue for quite a while now and direction of travel. The cameras tell a story. The cameras tell the story. The lady didn't attack him in the water. She didn't throw it at him. He's been charged with murder. Okay? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Jesus. Wow. Amazing. Yardi, you're amazing. You're in a class by yourself. You should vote for Trump. I want you to vote for Trump. Please do vote for Trump.
Do any publicity on it at all. I won the case, the biggest case. This is an attack on a political opponent. I have another one where I have a hostile judge.
We have you for a limited time, sir. I'd love to move on to different topics.
Excuse you. You're the one that held me up for 35 minutes, just so you understand.
If we can move on now to the state of the race, sir, I want to get back to the campaign. Senator J.D. Vance is your running mate. He's had a lot of controversy lately, and I want to read you a few things that he has said in the past. He said the Democrats running the country are a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. He's not talking here about how great it is to be a parent. He's attacking what he says are the choices people are making to not have children. Did you know that he had these views about people who do not have children before you picked him to be your running mate? And do you agree with him?
No, I know this. He is very family oriented. And he thinks family is a great thing. That doesn't mean he thinks that if you don't have a family, it's not. I know people with families. I know people with great families. I know people with very troubled families. And I also know people with no families. They didn't meet the right person. Things happen. You go through life, you don't meet the right person.
But he's not just talking about families here. He also says that people that don't have children should get less votes than those that do.
I'm just speaking for myself.
Is that your campaign
I think
position?
I'm speaking for him too. He strongly believes in family. But I know people with great families. I know people with not great families that don't have a family. And the people without the family are far better. They're superior in many cases, okay? He's not saying they're not. What he's saying is that he thinks the family experience is a very important thing. It's a very good thing. But that doesn't mean that if you grow up and you grow older and you don't meet somebody that would be wonderful to meet and would have been good, that that's a bad thing. He's not saying that. My interpretation, you'll have to ask him, actually, but my interpretation is he's strongly family-oriented, but that doesn't mean if you don't have a family, there's something wrong with it.
Just one last point, and then we'll move on. Just one of the bedrock principles of American life is one person, one vote. Senator J.D. Vance has suggested that someone who has children should have more votes than a person who does not have children. I just want to be clear here. Is that the position of your campaign?
Well, no, but it's not something I have ever heard before. I can tell you this. Right now, you have illegal aliens coming into our country, many from prisons and many from mental institutions, and they want to give them votes. I don't think they should have votes. They came into our country illegally, and they're taking the vote away from all of the people in this room that have been here a long time, that have worked hard, that in many cases, and you'll see this happening, if I'm not elected, you're going to see it happen. If I am, you're not going to have any problem. But you're going to see it happening a long time. You're going to see the people in this room and people outside of this room are going to be losing their jobs to people that have come into this country illegally.
Mr. President, can we stay with just kind of the state?
Let's go to what Trump is saying here, which is interesting. So J.D. Vance has made a lot of comments about a lot of different things. And one he talks about is denigrating women who don't have kids. And also basically indicating that, those who have kids should get more votes than those who don't have kids. And also indicating that the people who don't have kids don't have a stake in the country because they don't have any heirs. But here's what's interesting about that. If you were going to say about who should get more vote or who should pay more taxes, why wouldn't that be the person who doesn't have kids? And here is why. Because your kids utilize resources You need money for schooling. You need money to support those kids, right? So that means the tax dollar of the person who have kids is being used for those kids, which means those tax dollars are being used other than for the individuals who generate that income. So if you want to reverse that, you would say, what are you talking about? It's not supposed to be, is it the way this today works? But if one wants to go extreme, you could say, why would somebody, and look, I've had this in the workplace. We used to have the difficult discussion in the workplace, people, which was this. I have a team, I had a very young team, but had a couple of mothers on my team, right? The mothers had to leave early sometimes when they have kids to take care of. We used to work very, very late. And those other people stayed, and they would basically say, that's not fair. When it comes to compensation time or anything else, we treat it the same. But because I don't have kids, I don't get to go home. The other person gets to go home. How is that fair? It's a fair question to ask. Because you want to be treated equitable. You want to be treated the same, but it's not working the same in that workplace where one person gets to leave early because they have kids and you can't because you don't. This concept that because I don't have kids, I can't contribute to the country, I should pay more taxes, I should not have as good a vote, it's ridiculous. And he's saying that J.D. Vance, which we'll talk about, he'll mention later, is this brilliant person. He doesn't sound that brilliant. This is a person who thought that said, by the way, that he was the next coming of Hitler, that he was basically repulsive, but I guess they have made up. Really interesting. And to go back to, bless you, Shen, thanks for joining, thanks for being here. To Yardi, you come across like Clarence Thomas. I'm gonna tell you the truth, Yardi. I have no problem with contrarian views. The fact you can justify some cop saying he hasn't gone through the process yet, killing some person when the cameras are clear, you could justify what's his name that got killed in Minnesota too. When the cop had his neck, I'm sure you'd probably say you got to wait till you go to the judicial system when he had his neck on his neck and you saw him die. We don't need this person to go through the process sometimes. We have the evidence in front of us. It's just for the execution to occur. So when you're saying this thing, Yadi, that's why my perspective is. And when you're trying to defend the indefensible, I'm not having it. Sorry, not having it.
State of the race right now, because I felt like that vice president question, candidate question was right in there with that. Yeah. So let's talk about J.D. Vance for a little bit. He's had some stumbles out of the gate. I don't know if you're hearing what we hear as reporters, but it's been a tough couple of weeks for him. Why did you choose J.D. Vance? Why did you choose him? And I'm having a hard time hearing too. I know everybody out there can, but it's hard to hear. I'll tell you why.
I chose him because he's a very strong believer in work and the working man and woman, and especially the working man and woman who have been treated very unfairly, because you have many of them in this room, but you have many of those people, they were treated very unfairly. They worked very hard and they were treated unfairly. He wrote the book that became a bestseller. The movie became a smash hit. He's a very smart guy. Without the benefit of having a family that has contacts, like a father that was well-connected. He got into Yale Law School. He graduated in 2 years from Ohio State, summa cum laude. I mean, you take a look at, his career has been an amazing career. He started off at a level with a difficult family situation, very difficult with the mother and the father and everything else. He ends up going to Yale Law School and was one of the top students, became the head of the law journal. I mean, that's an amazing thing. He's a 4-year, he was in the military with great distinction for 4 years, got out, went into business, became successful in business, very successful in business, actually, did public offerings and other things. And I have to believe in that. I mean, he's somebody that was born in a rough situation. Most of the people know that situation because it was very well documented in his book. And I have a lot of respect for somebody that can get into Yale and become one of the best students in Yale, that meets a young woman at Yale who was also outstanding, and they get married, they have a beautiful family. But he had he's made himself an amazing life. He then goes to Ohio, lives in Ohio, and he had my endorsement. That helped. But he wins the Senate. He becomes a United States Senator. So he's a United States Senator. And so, Harris, like I respect you for your success, I respect people for their success.
The reason I asked the question is because the last time you and I sat and talked was the day that you were shot. We'd been together for much of that day. You left to go to Butler, Pennsylvania, and we didn't know what was next.
Yeah.
And
I'm
2 days
sorry.
after that,
I cannot understand your microphone.
I know
so
it is
muffled.
really hard for me
I
to
mean, it's
understand
just
you too.
I can understand you perfectly.
Because she's
Whoa.
closer.
I can understand you,
Happy to hear that, sir.
but I can't
Really happy to hear
understand
that.
Harris
I have a few more questions.
because of the distance, and the mics are really in lousy shape. But I cannot understand
Are you
So,
asking a question?
what you're saying. Go
so
ahead.
what I wanted to say was the last time we spoke, you said some words that were prophetic because I asked you who you wanted to choose for vice president.
Yeah.
And you said normally it really wouldn't matter what they would bring, you choose somebody that you think has a future, that sort of thing. But you said these words 3.5 hours before an attempted assassination on your life. You told me that bad things happen, Harris, and that's why this decision is important this time. Bad things happen. You said it twice. When you look at J.D. Vance, is he ready on day one?
Does he what?
Ready on day one, if he has to be.
I've always had great respect for him, and for the other candidates too. But I will say this, and I think this is well documented. Historically, the vice president, in terms of the election, does not have any impact. I mean, virtually no impact. You have 2 or 3 days where there's a lot of commotion as to who, like you're having it on the Democrat side, who it's going to be. And then that dies down, and it's all about the presidential pick. Virtually never has it mattered. Maybe Lyndon Johnson mattered for different reasons of what we're talking about, not for vote reasons, but for political reasons, other political reasons. But historically, the choice of a vice president makes no difference. You're voting for the president, and you can have a vice president who's outstanding in every way, and I think JD is. I think that all of them would have been, but you're not voting that way. You're voting for the president. You're voting for me. If you like me, I'm going to win. If you don't like me, I'm not going to win.
I'm going to get my J.D. Vance question in.
JD Vance?
I'm going to get my J.D. Vance question in. To your point and to Rachel's point, he, has a lot of opinions about childless women like myself or divorced people like yourself. Do you think, well, I mean, my point
but at
is
least
here.
it was said in a friendly manner.
My point is, do you think the Republican Party is getting a little bit too judgy about people's lives when you think about abortion or when you think about what J.D. Vance is saying?
I don't think, look, I think that the Democrat Party is really the one that has the problem. I think they're radical on abortion because they're allowing abortion in the 9th month. They're allowing the
But
death.
I think it's
They're
about
allowing
freedom,
the death
right?
of a baby after the baby is born, based on
Sir,
the
that's
governor
illegal
of Virginia.
in every state in the
That's
country.
Based on the governor of Virginia,
Executing a
they're
baby in
allowing the
every
death
state
of
in
the
the country
baby
is illegal.
after it's born.
It's a
They're
crime.
allowing abortions in the 8th and 9th month.
Well,
of
Democrats
pregnancy.
have denied.
I think they're right. And I
That's
think
the
the
thing.
Republican Party is actually much less. I think I've made them much less radical, perhaps. But the Republican Party, what we're doing is bringing it back to the states where everybody wanted it. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservative, everybody wanted abortion brought back. They didn't want Roe v. Wade in the federal government. They wanted it. Everybody
But the
wanted
majority
it
of
back.
Americans oppose
Excuse
Roe
me.
v. Wade being
They
overturned.
They
Multiple
don't know
polls have showed
about
that,
this.
sir.
Right now, they're voting. It brought it back to the states. Now, I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Ronald Reagan believed with rape, incest, life of the mother. I do. I think most people do. I think most Republicans do also. But if you take a look, right now they're doing, it's an amazing thing, out of the federal government, it's in states, and people are voting. And I will say, Ohio is, let's call it a more liberal version, has been approved. Kansas, the same thing, a little bit surprising to a lot of people. But the people are now voting. And it's taking this issue that's been going on for 52 years and has torn our country apart, and it's giving it to the people to vote on. And they're voting. And many states have already voted. Others are in the process of voting. And it's bringing it back to the people and a vote of the people. And it's not at all radical. And again, you have to follow your heart. I happen to believe in the 3 exceptions. Most people believe in the 3 exceptions. Most Republicans believe in the exceptions. But they don't want to see an abortion in the 9th month or the 8th month. Almost everybody agrees to that. And they certainly don't want to see, in the case of the governor of Virginia, the former governor, I might add, who said, we set the baby aside and then we decide what to do. Meaning, what do? We execute the baby. That's a radical, horrible position. And some people want that. I don't want it. Most people don't.
Thank you. Can I just pivot really quickly to another question about, you brought up health, Harris. You're an active man. We see you golfing all the time. But if you win, you'll still be president at 82.
No.
Which is older than Biden is right now.
But not mentally. Look, mentally.
Here's the question.
He's shot. But most people.
Would you consider?
Most people. I know many people.
Before he answered that question, a couple of things. One is about J.D. Vance. Look, no one can question J.D. Vance's academic credentials and the fact that he was in the military and the fact that he was a venture capitalist, even though not a long time being a venture capitalist. So that's out there. And some of the things he said, which has been referred to here, are all meant to appeal to a certain base. He was endorsed by Trump, even though he lambasted Trump. In fact, there's probably nobody who has lambasted Trump when he was running in 2016. So it's not surprising that he has to pick somebody who has lambasted him, because everyone did basically call him a racist, call him a person who is xenophobic. All those derogatory words were thrown at him. So I think he could find one person. He just got to pick the best of a bad lot, frankly, when he's trying to pick his VP. What he also said, which is interesting and which will materialize throughout the conversation, is the VP doesn't matter. The VP doesn't make any decision. They may be smart and good, but they don't play a role. And yet he has said previously, and will say here again, he's labeling the current vice president as owning things, when he's basically saying they don't own anything. They don't make any decision. They're not necessarily even important. And he never answered the question around, if something happened to you, is J.D. Vance ready to assume the responsibility? He took J.D. Vance for a number of reasons. And one of them is that he will suck up all the news. He's young, so they won't be analogizing or trying to do a comparison between him and J.D. Vance. Plus, he wants to mitigate the age argument by also having J.D. Vance. Those things are clear. So it's a strategic approach to take J.D. Vance, but it's backfiring in a number of ways. Because J.D. Vance, every time he speaks, put his foot to nowhere. Every time he speaks, something comes out which makes people cringe. And he's not helping the Republican ticket, and he's not helping Trump.
People in their 80s and their 90s that are in great shape. Some of our greatest leaders. You look at throughout the world history, the greatest leaders, some of the greatest leaders in the world were in their 80s.
But here's the question. Would you consider stepping down if you felt that your health was declining? Or would you?
Oh, absolutely.
And who would?
I think I'd know.
How would you make that decision?
I think I'd know. Look, if I came onto a stage like this and I got treated so rudely as this woman treated
Oh my goodness.
me, and I'm fine with it because she was very rude, sir. Very rude. That wasn't a question. She didn't ask me a question. She gave a statement. That wasn't a question.
I repeated your statement, sir, actually.
You said you would. You would.
Oh,
make that
absolutely.
decision
If I
to step
thought
down.
that I was failing in some way, I want people to be sharp. I'll go a step further. I want anybody running for president to take an aptitude test, to take a cognitive test. I think it's a great idea. And I took 2 of them and I aced them.
Well,
I took 2 of them. But let me ask you.
Yeah.
I would like to have people running for president. And I don't mean because they're 75 or 85. I think anybody running, I'd like to do it. People say it's not constitutional. I would like to have something passed where you can do it. I think we should know. I mean, I've watched what's happened in the last couple of years under this gentleman, and our country is a mess. We have inflation. We have the millions of people falling in. We have Afghanistan, which was the worst, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. What he has done to our country, and her too, what they've done to our country. She has been a horrible vice president. She's considered the worst vice president in the history of our country.
Don't mean to interrupt you, but would you consider taking the cognitive test?
Mr. President.
I would love to
and
do
make it public.
Well, I've already taken 2 of them, but I'll do it again.
So Trump continued talks about there are a couple of things. When he talks about J.D. Vance and his background and what he's achieved and how he sort of came almost inferring he came from nothing to where he is. And he said he loves that. That's not his history, by the way. Trump's dad was as rich as they come, gave him a lot of money. Trump blew a lot of it, buying prized assets, real estate in New York, going bankrupt 4 times. So, of course, he's going to admire people who have achieved things from a challenging background because he doesn't have the same history. And this whole thing about a cognitive test, and he talked about Kamala failing her bar exam in the first go around. Has anybody ever seen Trump's academic record? Has anybody ever seen Trump's taxes, apart from his niece published that taxes in the New York Times? Trump talks a big game, but he doesn't produce. And he's intimidated by some people's intellect because his is not the greatest, which is very obvious. I have never seen him provide anything about his academic achievement. He said he goes to, I think he said he went to Penn or something, can't see any of his grades. He refused to let the schools release his grades because nobody prevents a school from releasing your grades when you have excellent grades. No one does that I know of. So it's really interesting when he says certain things, and he talks about cognitive tests. 2 + 2 = 4. I think most people know that. Yes, Biden wasn't necessarily at the best place, but Trump's cognitive test, he talks about, I will take it. It's just like when he was running in 2016 or 15 to 16, he says, I'll show you my taxes, which every other presidential candidate does since people have been releasing their taxes. He didn't do it. He hasn't done it. He will never do it. And he will never take any cognitive tests because he'll know how dumb he is.
Mr. President, how do you intend to...
I suggested, Harris, that let's take one. I said, Joe and I will go and take a cognitive test. Now, I'd do it with her, too. I would do it with her also. You know what? She failed her law exam. She didn't pass her law exam, so maybe she wouldn't pass the cognitive test.
Mr. President,
Are you saying she wouldn't pass? Just to be clear,
I'm just giving you the facts.
to be clear, you don't think Harris?
how do you intend,
She didn't pass her bar exam, and she didn't think she would pass it, and she didn't think she was going to ever pass it. And I don't know what happened. Maybe she passed it.
She did pass it.
There's a man over here. I think he must work.
Mr. President, I would love to ask you about January 6th. You've called your...
So the bar exam situation, as you mentioned before, I think she failed on her first attempt. If I'm not recalling wrongly, Hillary Clinton may have failed on the first attempt. I don't think that's the worst thing. People fail bar exams on the first attempt a lot of times. They fail CP exams on their first attempt. They fail engineering exams on their first attempt. The question is, how much intestinal fortitude do you have and how much do you put in? Because sometimes you don't put in the work initially, but you go back and do it differently. Not everyone is successful on their first attempt. So him trying to denigrate her intelligence, I cannot wait for her to debate him. And I know he must be quaking in his shoes because if they have good, and you notice, these moderators are not controlling him. And this view, like the lady on the right is the queen and this person in the middle is balanced, the person on the right is his friend. She works at Fox News. That's the Trump network. And let's get that clear. She's not trying to ask him difficult questions. She's throwing softballs, questions she's asked him before. I'd be shocked if she didn't give him the questions before he came there, because those are her questions.
Called yourself the candidate of law and order. Yeah. When Time Magazine asked you if you would consider pardoning all the rioters, you said, yes, absolutely. Sure. You called them patriots. 140 police officers were assaulted that day. Their injuries included broken bones, at least one officer lost an eye, one had 2 cracked ribs, 2 smashed spinal discs, another had a stroke. Were the people who assaulted those 140 officers, including those I just mentioned, patriots who deserve pardons?
So before he answers, I think Rachel started on the wrong foot and she never pivoted. Her tone, so when you ask a question, it's a combination of what you ask and the tone, right? Goda's tone was the person in the middle. It's more an embracing type tone. It's not trying to be confrontational. It's almost like an inquiry. Rachel's tone is confrontational. And therefore she's going to get a confrontational response or not the response she's looking for. If she had realized and pivot and be aware and soften her tone, because he keeps saying that how mean she was, it may have solicited a better engagement.
Well, let me bring it back to modern day. Like about 5 days ago, we had an attack on the Capitol, a horrible attack on the Capitol. You saw the people that were protesting and spraying these incredible monuments, bells, lions, all these magnificent limestone and granite with red paint, red spray paint that will never actually come off, especially on the limestone. It will never, I'm a builder, I know about this stuff. You'll see it in 100 years from now. They viciously attacked our government. They fought with police. They fought with them much more openly than I saw on January 6th. What's going to happen to those people? What's going to happen to the people in Portland that destroyed that city?
But sir, my question is on those.
What's going to happen to the people that tried to burn?
My question is on those rioters who assaulted officers.
You have to
would you pardon
what's
those
going to
people?
happen? Oh, absolutely, I would.
You would pardon those?
If they're innocent, I would pardon them.
They've been convicted.
And by the way, the Supreme Court they were convicted by a very tough system. How come the people that tried to burn down Minneapolis, how come the people that took over a large percentage of Seattle, how come nothing happened to them? How come the people
But sir, we're talking about people that were seen beating officers with flagpoles, dragging them down the stairs. They're on video. Have you seen that video, sir?
Oh, really? Well,
you would pardon those rioters?
They shot a young lady in the face who was protesting. They shot her in the face. You know, nobody died that day. You do know that. But people died in Seattle. Nobody.
By the way, one of his supporters died that way. And the lady was trying to go into, I think it may have been the house, actually. I mean, she got shot going through the window. So somebody did die. No police officer died that day. Others committed suicide subsequent to, or died of other ailments subsequent to the event. But she did die. One person did die.
Died, but people died in Minneapolis. You know, people died in Minneapolis. And nothing happens, and nobody ever talks, and nothing happens to those people. But you went after the J6 people with a vengeance. And I'll tell you what about the cops that were, and I'm all for the police, as you know, but what about the police that are ushering everybody into the Capitol? Go in. What about that? Look, nothing is perfect in life, but you have people from Minneapolis, you have people just from 5 days ago in Washington, D.C., they were having fistfights and fighting with the police. They were spraying and destroying. They were desecrating our monuments in Washington, D.C. 5 days ago, and nothing happened to them. And you can't have two systems of justice. That's why they went after me as a political opponent, because they felt they couldn't win without doing that. And we're going to win our cases, and we're going to be vindicated. But I have to spend a lot of time on that and money. That's what they want. After the election, they won't care. Although in my case, I think they probably will, because the hatred is pretty deep. But I'll tell you, they went after me as a political opponent. That's never happened in our country before, and it sets a terrible, terrible precedent.
What do you do on day one if you win? What's your first thing?
What do I do?
So I guess if you're one of those rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, and you've been sent to jail for 5, 6, 7 years, you're praying for Trump to be president. You may get out the next day after it, right? Because you were supporting him. He instigated all of it. He didn't literally tell you to go, but he did enough to convince you to go, and you followed his lead because he said the election was stolen when it wasn't stolen. So yeah, you're praying for him to be president. And he's also equating this to his own situation when he's being charged in so many cases. And luckily, he appointed so many people in the Supreme Court that he's never going to go to jail.
I close the border, and I do two things, because I can do a lot of things simultaneously. I close the border. We don't want people coming. We want people to come in, Harris, but they have to be vetted. They have to be checked. They have to come in legally. I want people to come into our country, but they have to be vetted. They have to be checked. So when you say, what do I do? That, and I drill, baby, drill. I bring energy way down. I bring interest rates down. I bring inflation way down so people can buy bacon again, so people can buy a ham sandwich again, so that people can go to a restaurant and afford it. Because right now, people can't buy food.
So people, when somebody said they're going to do something, have you heard what he said he's going to do? I'm going to bring inflation down. How do you bring inflation down? I'm going to bring interest rate down. How do you bring interest rate down? Right? I'm going to drill energy. U.S. has more energy than probably any other country on earth. They have a lot of reserves. They buy from other countries, going to preserve their reserve in case of contingency and emergency. So what are we talking about when we say we're going to bring inflation down and bring interest rate down? That's what the Fed has been doing for the last 2 years. And that's why they've hinted that they may reduce interest rate because inflation is under control. It's about containing inflation. And as I mentioned before, the two are linked and connected. They're not mutually exclusive. So when he says he's going to do this thing, he hasn't told us what he's going to do. I'm going to drill. And what does that mean? How does that change anything? You're going to flood the market with oil? So what does OPEC do when you flood the market with oil in the US? What does OPEC do? So I don't understand what he's saying because he hasn't given you any concrete plans about how he's going to fix the problem when the problem actually is being fixed.
Your grocery bills are up 40, 50, 60%, right? She's agreeing to me. Oh, she's agreeing. Thank you. I like you very much.
Mr. President, I think we are.
But it's true. Your grocery bills are up. And then they're mandating that you buy an all-electric car. You know, Elon Musk endorsed me, and he's a friend of mine. He's a good guy. He's a smart guy. But I'm against everybody having an electric car, okay? I'm very much against that. You have to be able to, if you want a hybrid or if you want a gasoline-propelled car. But, you know, we have more liquid gold, gasoline, oil, under our feet than any other country, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than any other country. I want to use it. I want to use what we have. I want to bring down prices, bring down costs, and I also have to stop the invasion. And remember, they're taking your jobs. These people coming in are taking your jobs.
Project 2025.
I think we have to leave it there by the Trump team.
All right.
So leave it. That is the last word. Thank you so much.
So that's a little bit sad because I would love to hear his answer on Project 2025 because he's denied knowing about Project 2025, which is being something concocted by the Heritage Foundation, which is meant to sort of re-engineer federal government, frankly, significantly cut Medicare, Medicaid, things of that nature. And it was going to be asked by the so-called queen on the panel by somebody in the chat. I'll be curious to see how he answers Project 2025. I'm sure she has thrown him the answer and he will come up with something, but it's not something that people are embracing. And you'll hear more about this over time around Project 2025 and what it entails. It's a 900-page document. I have no intention of reading the entire document. I'm going to get the Cliff Notes. I'm going to read certain pages. Depends on the nature of what's in there and what the topics are. But I am spending my time reading 900 pages of Republican stuff, actually, because it ain't got nothing to do with me and you. Oh, no, I'm correct. Me and you, but it does have something to do with Yardy because that's the area that he focuses on. He seemed to infer as a Republican. They can't do anything wrong. He's a Trump supporter. They say he voted for Trump. More power to Yardy. And please vote for him again. So anyway, people, I've come to the end of the evening. This is a 1-hour program. First of all of you have turned up. I appreciate you being here. I thought it was important to go through all the questions, all the answers. You hear my view on this as I started out, which is I thought Rachel Scott was a little bit too aggressive. In fact, quite a bit too aggressive at the inception of the conference. That's not how you do interviews. You have to bring people in, have a good dialogue, let them get comfortable. You can't ask questions which are confrontational and your tone so confrontational. It's a recipe for disaster in this forum, and it almost was. Goda was balanced. Harris was her normal acquiescing self and pondering to Trump. He did what he normally does. It's the Trump that we know, right? He didn't say anything or do anything that we don't know. The same Trump that we know. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. The next debate, he wants it to be on Fox. I think it was supposed to be ABC for the next one. He doesn't want that. And Rachel Scott is from ABC, so that's not going to help tonight, actually. Look, I don't care who hosts the debate. What I care about is who the moderators are. So the moderator is just going to be Fox personnel. Democrats shouldn't do it. I am very confident in Kamala's ability to debate him because he answers nothing. All those things he's espousing about the economy and about inflation and how he's going to change it, he hasn't said one thing he's going to do. Is he going to force manufacturers to cut their prices? Because prices are not going down. If I had a car that was selling for $50,000, it's now $70,000. You think the car manufacturer, Tesla going to drop it to $50,000? The only way they drop it if it's not selling, people. They ain't dropping it. There's no reason to. If it's not selling, they'll have to drop it to create demand, but they're not selling it. So I don't know what he's talking about when he say, you know what, he's going to fix inflation and he's going to fix XYZ. Inflation is already under control. You don't have to fix inflation. Why do you need to fix his prices? How am I going to get those prices down? The only way you fix prices is if you have oversupply. So if the cars pile up and can't sell, which consumers should probably go on strike sometime and don't buy these things to force manufacturers to reduce prices, and then hit the entire supply chain. So the parts people need to be hit. All those people need to be hit to reduce prices. It's not one-dimensional. The car company is paying the parts company for those parts, and those prices are high, so they'll raise the price accordingly to allow them to make a certain profit. So it's important then for the prices to be reduced because inflation is under control. And inflation is just a rising price of goods and services. The price already went up. They're not coming down. That's the problem. Yeah. So if you don't sell the cars, they pile up on the dealer lot. They have to drop the prices because they have to move inventory. As you can't produce new cars, consumers benefit, price come down, then it's better for us as consumers. Because right now, I'll admit prices are too high for a lot of products. As I said, it went up over 20%. That's on average. So imagine some things went up much more than others since February 2020. A year of that was in Trump's presidency because COVID hit when he was around and prices went up when he was around. No, they exacerbated during Biden's tenure, and now they're more like stabilized, but they're too high. And wages haven't increased at the same rates of prices, and that's what the challenge that we're running into. So don't know who's going to moderate Drew Ross. They may not even have one because he's pushing back. He now realizes that he said Biden is not cognitive function don't work really well. So he was happy to deal with Biden. He wasn't brilliant in the debate. It was because Biden was just so bad, right? It's not like he was brilliant. Biden just is not there. Look, the Biden we know 4 years ago is not the Biden we know today. Biden's going through a tough time. He's very aged. He's, as Trump says, which is true, he's an older 81 than a lot of people who are probably his age, actually. Now, a lot of people who are 80-something have cognitive ability. They may have Alzheimer's, declining medical faculties. Those things happen. But I think in this case, we have seen a rapid decline in Biden. Now, what Trump has also said and what Vance has said is that Kamala owned that because she hid this from the American people. So they blame everything on her. The good thing is that I've heard her in a number of different environments. She'll hold her own. I'm looking forward to this. And by the way, people, go check the polls. They just brought in the polls from Arizona, from the swing states is all that matter. All the swing states matters. All the other states which are moving towards being swing, like Minnesota, they don't matter anymore. They're back in play. North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan. That's the election. 10% of the population, that's the election. And they're all swinging one way. They're moving towards the blue line. In some states, like Michigan, it was out 4 or 5 points differential between the two. All those numbers are changing. And I would love to have the debate to bring it to closure because I believe that she will do well in those debates. She'll answer the questions. And look, she'll have some tough questions to answer. The economy and the borders, which is about immigration, are the big challenges. But by the way, people, which I've said before, people don't realize, go and check the stats in Obama era and in Biden era, how many people have been deported? Go check how much they're the deportee presidents. I would love to do a comparison with Trump era, actually. I'm going to do some analysis on that because I'm telling you, they have deported a lot of people under both those presidents. It doesn't seem that way because more people are trying to come in, especially from countries like Venezuela, which is undergoing significant turmoil, and which recently you saw Maduro lost the election supposedly based on evidence gathered and still has the military and the police under his domain so he can hold on to power. So people are fleeing that island because the U.S. has squeezed them, just like how they squeezed Cuba. So economic activity in those countries are down significantly. But we'll see what happens over time if this continues. A lot of Venezuela, and Venezuela was a rich country at one point, people. Before Chavez took over, rich country. U.S. squeezed them on the Chavez. They're getting squeezed on the Maduro. We'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, we're in an interesting place. The race was over before Biden announced a few weeks ago. The race is on, people. And we're looking forward to this race. So some people, like a person in this chat who, and there may be more than one, who want to vote Republican, go vote where you need to vote. I'm going to stick with my people. There's nothing, Trump has been one of the most racist person on this planet, given the power that he holds, and it's not debatable. It's not debatable. And the people who told me that the Republicans and what they're voting for, I find it interesting, the criteria they use to determine who they should be their elected leaders and the person's integrity, morality, principles, and the people that hate them, they want in power, not having it. So Brian said, what the Middle East? Iran voting to attack Israel. How this will impact? Iran talks a lot. Brian Burke. Israel keep killing people in their country and they do nothing about it. Israel killed one of their, I think, 2 of their chief nuclear scientists. They just killed the head of Hamas, who was in Iran. So that means Israel has spies there. They have people there. They have ways of knowing. Israel has nuclear weapons, people. Right? I know Iran's trying to get nuclear weapons, but Israel has nuclear weapons. And Israel has a firepower. Nothing going to happen. The thing that Israel hasn't figured out yet, which is really interesting, is that so you kill all the Hamas people, you get rid of Hamas, then what? Then what's your excuse? Exactly, Foreign Spider. I'm not voting against myself. If you say you want to get rid of Hamas and you have to extinguish Hamas, I don't even know what that means actually, because you create more Hamas every day when you kill people and destroy their home and kill their families. But when you do so, and you say they want a 2-state solution, what are you suggesting? You have no out. I don't know how people make decisions like that. So Netanyahu, who is a dictator in a sense, because he's trying to change the Supreme Court and he's been there in power forever, and he finds way to stay in power. He's like Trump. He was going to get convicted for bribery or something in that vein, and he finds way to stay in power, so he'll never get tried. Seems like what Trump wanted to do, because he's going to get tried in a bunch of cases, including the election case. But we'll see how the election case play out, given that he was president and is a president of allowed to overturn an election. Interesting one for the Supreme Court to jangle with, but the Supreme Court is not an example to follow anymore, given how entitled they are. They have no checks and balances. They're not people to emulate. They're just not. They have taken the country 10 steps backwards. But anyway, people, I've come to the end of tonight's discussion. Thank you for being here. We'll be back next week. I'm supposed to have someone next week to talk more about immigration, an attorney to talk about immigration next week. Let's hope he's available. We've had a dialogue. Immigration in a much more broader sense. We make it a little more detailed in terms of what individuals need to do, but much more broad in terms of implication of immigration on the economy, on the country. What does that mean? What's the implication for the various groups? And then we may talk a little bit about, legal immigration. So thanks for being here. Love you being here. Please hit the like button before you leave. Spread the word about the channel, what we talk about. And I promise to be much more balanced against when it comes to other topics. But when it comes to Trump, I find it difficult. So people, good night. Take care. Have a great rest of the week. Peace out.